So one of the most common encoding formats used all over the internet is Base64. So as is obvious from the name, Base64 has 64 letters or alphabets. I mean, they're the same as the English alphabet and numbers and some special characters, but when you encode any string in the Base64 format, it takes those strings and the information, usually it's byte information, 1011, stuff like that, and then it encodes it in these 64 symbols. Now, what was the need for this? So when you transmit data over the internet, you usually do it in this format, right? So if you were to think of these as bits, right, these are different bits, and if you were to think of these in terms of groupings, so in some systems you might group these bits starting from the first letter, so this goes like this, and so you might have these three groups. However, if you group this, if you do the groupings from the rightmost end, then you might get these three groupings, right? And this significantly changes the information that is being transferred. So for prevention of such things, Base64 is used to encode these bytes or these bits into a Base64 format so that it's more absolute and easier for different systems to communicate. Now, practically speaking, why learn about Base64 or any base encoding in general? So you might get a challenge in the CTF wherein the flag itself or something very important to the flag was encoded in this format. Now, you might look at it and you might go like, I think I've seen this string somewhere. One common thing about Base64 is that for every 3 characters from the ASCII table, or for every 3 byte characters, you might have 4 Base64 characters. So what do I mean? So we have this some string, some plain text string that is to be converted into Base64 that goes like say A, B, and C. Then most probably in Base64 there will be 4 characters that will take its place. Why does this happen? Because each of these characters usually are 8 bits long, 1 byte long, right? ASCII characters. And Base64 is 2 to the power 6. So each Base64 character is 6 bits long. So when you think of it, 8 into 3 is 24 bits. And then 6 into 4 is 24 bits. So for the same amount of byte information or bit information, first of all, these characters are converted to bits. Then those bits are converted to Base64 encoding. So for the same amount of bits, you have 3 characters in a 8-bit encoding, and you have 4 characters in Base64 encoding. So that's the underlying concept behind it. You do not need to think too much about it though, if you're supposed to solve problems, because when you're solving problems, you'll probably be using this site, which I talked about before. You'll be using this site. You'll be using CyberChef, which looks something like this. So for CyberChef, you have a lot of built-in functionalities which are really nice. So let's look at some of them. So from here you can see we have from Base64 to Base64. To Base64 converts the input into Base64 format. So if we were to do hello, this converts it into Base64 format. So one thing to remember about Base64 is that at the end of most things you'll get an equals to sign, and that might help you identify Base64 strings while you're doing questions in the real world. Now, if you were to take this thing, you were to copy this, and you can use this functionality that is from Base64, and you can just directly paste it into CyberChef, and it will give you the actual output.